petition the Bureau for Indian Affairs in Washington officially added back to the reservation.
Yeah, I thought what I might do, my dad's getting ready to turn 77, and while his health is doing last 2 or 3 days, see maybe one summer day next year if he wanted to come back. Did you ever see the performance? Well, he played the understudy for June.
Just goes to show you that no matter what, we all pay for the sins of our fathers.
Shower. All of a sudden, he's the lead.
I'm ready, and we're live streaming.
Okay.
We're testing it.
All right, we are ready, so I will call the meeting to order. If everybody please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Baird, if you would please lead us in an invocation.
Sure will. Heavenly Father, we come before you this morning with grateful hearts for the many blessings you've set our way. We just ask that the actions that we take as a board today would be in conformance with your will. And Lord, also, before our next meeting, we've got an election coming up for mayor and town council. We would just ask that the results of that would reflect your will. And we thank you for all you do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bruce.
Yes, sir.
Well, happily, it would appear that we do, in fact, have a quorum. Mr. Baird is present. Mr. Hinkle. Absent are Mr. McKay and McGlowan. And guys, I think we've got a fairly straightforward agenda this morning. This was distributed in advance, and so unless there have been any changes since this went out last week, I'd ask for a motion that we approve the agenda.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved. That takes us to approval of our minutes from the August 15 meeting. If you'd like to take a couple of moments to review those.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes from the August 15th regular meeting.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes. That brings us to new business. And I believe we're going to have a workshop today with Clint Calhoun. And Shannon, are you planning to introduce that, or would you like for Clint to do that?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. This comes to us on recommendation. One of the things that Clint and I tried to do was to go through the tree protection provisions and just focus on the things that, from Clint's perspective, having been a driver of these regulations now for some time, to give you some feedback on changes that he feels are important to make so that the ordinance can be enforced more appropriately and more efficiently, more effectively. Really not a lot of additions. There are some deletions, tweak here and there. What I would petition the board to do is to go all the way through Clint's recommendations. We get to the end. If you want to get into more of the substantive type issues that you may have about changes, then let's take it up at that time. But let's go through this from hear from Clint, and then decide where you want to go from there. If you're satisfied with what Clint has done, we certainly can put this in ordinance format, and we'll bring it back to you in addition to another amendment regarding commercial signs at your next meeting. We'll button that up and then get that ready for the council. So that's kind of the format, recommended format, if it pleases the board.
Sounds like a good plan, I think.
Okay.
Welcome, Clint. Glad to have you with us.
I appreciate that. Thank you, gentlemen, for being speak to you this morning. Just like to say, first of all, when we talk about trees, we're talking really about three pieces of legislation that's divided up amongst. We have one that really deals more with licensing of tree service providers and covers things like that. And then you have the tree provisions within the zoning regulations, where there's a section that's designated toward tree. And then it also has a little bit of impact in the mountain hillside development. Kind of what we're dealing with. One of the things that we wanted to do was to take a common sense approach to these regulations and seeing, you know, what's necessary and what's really either repeated in other places in our regulations, so that redundancy. Just try to, you know, make things as comprehensive as possible, but still have enough, you know, attitude to be able to make it easier on the people who, whenever they're putting a plan together for us, it's not like they're having to go through this whole rigmarole when it can be done in an easier way. I guess is the best way of explaining it. So if you don't mind, we'll go through and I can point out the changes that have been made. The additions are few, the deletions are more so, and we'll kind of explain why we read those sections as we go through. So what we'll do is we'll start with Chapter 65, which is the tree protection ordinance. And we added a definition there under excessive tree trimming. We had a definition of excessive removal of trees, but we didn't have anything for excessive tree trimming. And in reviewing that, we saw that that was something that was needed because it was mentioned. And so we used a definition that actually comes from the International Society of Horticulture, where it talks about, it defines excessive tree trimming as the removal of limbs or branches that significantly alter the natural shape of a tree, potentially undermining its long-term health. And the good thing about that definition is it covers a larger list of tree pruning techniques, particularly topping. That's always been the major concern with trimming trees here in town. It's not considered an acceptable practice, the ISA. So we use that definition, and that should cover that. And that's when we license people. That's what we're not allowed to top trees. This is the recommended methods for trimming trees in my tree. And if you are going to get licensed, this is what we expect. Under the definition of tree services, we removed grading from that. And the reason for that is because what we saw in this was if you're going to be doing work to, say, clear a site for a house, then what we were seeing is because of the way the ordinance was written, it meant that as a bulldozer operator, you either had to be licensed as a tree protection provider or tree services provider, or you had to be operating under the license of a tree service provider. And we just felt like that was just a little bit unnecessary. Because really, when you think of tree service provider, you're thinking about somebody who's called in by a property owner to remove limbs that are hanging over a house, or take down a tree that's hazardous or something like that. So we wanted to make sure that it was well understood what we were trying to say there, that it shouldn't necessarily include grading as far as a licensed service. So that's kind of 65.3 under prohibitions. We added or excessive tree trimming after the excessive illegal trees. And we also added the section 4 when done by public utility or its designee. You know, we all recognize that power line right-of-ways have to be maintained, and really that's a very difficult thing for us as a town to regulate when the utility company comes through and they need to trim the right-of-ways. I mean, honestly, I'd say if we were going to regulate that, we would tell them they really need to cut more, because a lot of times, aspen goes through, they don't take enough because they'll leave limbs that are still hanging over. You're like, well, if that tree falls, you know, isn't that going to tear down the power line? So we just felt like that needed to be put in there so that we're not trying to police what the utility company does. We don't necessarily agree a lot of times with the way they cut trees, but they have a specific protocol, and the way they do it, according to all of their educational materials, is that they do it with regard to the health of the tree. I don't like the way it looks, but that's the way it is. And it's just something we really don't get into the enforcement of the utility companies. So that's pretty much it for that section. Then we moved into the zoning regulations under Chapter 8, 2.119, land clearing and grading associated with development. We added the words TPO may require, the TPO is the tree protection officer, may require a site plan to take the form of a topographic survey of the subject property, etc. And this is partly because what we find is when we have these site plans, generally somebody comes in with a plan. They kind of got it drawn out the way the areas that they're going to be disturbing, and we expect generally that's going to, trees are going to have to be removed. If you put a house in, a driveway, septic, then it's understood that trees are going to be removed from those areas. And that was, you know, kind of in the whole aspect of the topographic survey. If it's not on a steep slope lot, that's not something that we typically require, and it may not be necessary in a lot of cases. So that's why we put the may require if we see that it's needed.
Clint, may I inject?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, as Clint just pointed out, there's some circumstances. This says they shall. And so what we're doing is we're changing it so that when Clint gets in the mix, he can say, well, it's not needed in this instance. So
One complaint that I've heard from various people is that if they come in and they may not know about steep slope ordinance, or they know that, you know, they come in and they think they're good to go, and then maybe they really aren't good to go. Would it be helpful where we've got a regulation like this, where something else may come into play, just to parenthetically put in there, see steep slope ordinance?
I'll defer to the,
I don't know that that's something we can do, but it just came to mind.
would that be a way to resolve it, or do we need to put a little more energy into maybe our pamphlets that we put together as educational material?
I think a lot of that it comes on the education.
So a lot of people that come and do something like they'll get a permit for whatever, don't want an education. They want to do one thing. They're not doing it day in and day out. And they say, I'm going to come do this one thing, and I don't want to know what the town regulations are. I want to know what I have to do to accomplish A, B, and C.
Mr. Moore, to your point, could we say something in there like the TPO may, subject to the hillside steep slope regulations, require topo? I mean, is that sort of the trigger? Because if that really is the only instance in which you're requiring it, you know, cross-referencing it would at least justify why you're, in that case, asking them to do a topo. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I don't really care how it's accomplished. I would just like for folks to be able to, you know, to make sure, to leave knowing that they have all the information that they need, that they've have filled out every form they need to fill out, and can leave with confidence knowing that, they're good to go and they're squared away.
In a situation like that, Commissioner Moore, the only thing that I can think of is if someone comes in and they're explaining to either Clint or Brad
Yeah.
that they have a need to take some trees out, that staff person is going to tell them everything they need to know before they leave.
Yeah.
So they've got that.
Okay.
I can't,
And I
I
don't
can't,
know that it's
because they're probably not going to be reading the ordinance anyway. It's going to be these guys reading it and interpreting the ordinance.
And one of the complications that we have is it's either you require a topo survey automatically, or we tell them up front, well, you know, this is your site plan, and oh, by the way, we're gonna have to run a GIS analysis on this lot to see if it falls within the criteria of the Mountain Hillside Development Board. If it does, you may have to submit additional information. That's kind of the way it is now, and that's probably where some of the frustration comes, because, you know, unless they voluntarily provide that topographic survey, we don't know until we run the analysis. So they're either gonna have to run it on the front end,
Which is costly.
which is gonna cost them a little bit more money, or they can find out from us after the fact, you're gonna have to have a topo survey on this, because, you know, what we've got is saying that you're over the limit.
Or looking at it from another way, what you're doing is running GIS, and based on GIS, they get an exemption based on your findings.
Exactly.
If it's not exempt, based on their analysis using GIS, then they have to provide the topo. And that's where the cost comes
We
in.
just felt like that if we weren't having to require that on the front end, then we're saving, you know, the customer quite a bit of money if they don't have to have it. And the thing is, if they're gonna have to have it after the fact, after we, you know, get all their paperwork and going through, you know, the permitting process, and we see, oh, this is a steep slope lot, you're gonna have to have this, it's very likely that they're gonna have more than that anyway.
Well, I don't really care how we get to accomplishing that. I would just like for people to be able to leave either assurance that, yeah, I'm good to go, or I may need something else, or I will need something else. And I don't know how to get there. I'll, you know, however you all tell me is the best way to get there is fine with me. But I have heard that several times. I don't know if anybody else up here. You ever hear it, Jonathan, or experience anything?
I hear it from people that aren't from this area and don't understand the regulations.
Right.
But everybody else that does work here over and over again, they tend to understand the regulations.
Sure. Well, that's really who I'm thinking about, is folks who come in and aren't that familiar with,
Yeah.
either they just have lived here and haven't paid attention, had no reason to pay attention to it, or they're up here on the weekends or whatever, but.
Well, this would apply to land clearing, which may or may not apply to the construction of a home.
Right.
Right, so that if it's the construction of a home, then they obviously know they gotta go through it, right? But in what are the other cases that it would apply in land clearing, that we allow land clearing? I don't know that there's that many.
Yeah. What I'm speaking to is really larger than just this. Y'all get where I'm coming from. I just want people to be able to leave knowing they've got what they need.
Right.
Do you have to apply for a permit to remove a tree, or?
Used to, you had to, and it was so cumbersome that we just eliminated it, because it meant that I had to go out every single time somebody wanted to cut a tree, and it just felt like that was unnecessary.
So what's the process? If somebody wants to come in and do something short of building a house,
That
which
was
is a
why
whole
we
nother
created the
approval.
licensing, chapter, was so that we could, license
The vendors.
service providers, they could go out and make assessments, and they could, tell that property owner what the best course of action was. Knowing that they've been licensed by the town, they've taken the test, they know what the rules are, they know what's expected of them as tree service providers. And so we expect them to give, their clients the best information that they can. The only exception that requires me to go out is if it's something that's within the trap buffer, and I have to actually, make an assessment. there.
So as a citizen or homeowner, I don't have to come to the town for permission to remove
The only
trees.
thing that is, you have to do as a citizen is you have to use a licensed tree service provider.
So do we keep a list of who those are and how long is, once they get their license, how long is that
Good
good?
forever,
Until they screw up.
until they screw up. They
Yeah.
screw up.
So I guess we're really relying here upon the general population knowing that in fact that's required.
Yeah.
And if I bring my tree guy from home because he's gonna stay in my house as a trade-off for doing his tree work, I don't know, he doesn't know.
Yeah, and that's one of the areas that we've had difficulty. And Shannon and I, we talked about this some when we were going over this. Is how do we make it known to folks outside of town? You know, like John makes a good point. If they don't live here full time, they may not be totally familiar with all the requirements of what that. If they hire somebody to say they get a tree cutter out of Florida because they like them and they just want to bring them up here for the weekend to remove trees, well, technically they're in violation of our ordinance because they're not licensed. They haven't been through they haven't taken the test. They haven't been through the licensing process. They don't know any of our regulations. So there's an educational component that is really needed, and we're not really sure what the best approach to doing that is. But we still feel that having some type of licensing process is important. Otherwise, we go back to what we had before, which is trees being butchered.
Well, I know we're not here to discuss the administration of all this, but I think practically it is very much related. As a suggestion, once council decides if they choose to modify any of this, it might make sense to do some sort of a postcard mailing to all of our property owners to make them aware of, here's some typical things that often happen when you're a property owner that you need to keep in mind. If you want to do these things, check with the town before beginning work. Like, I had no idea until it came up some months ago that you needed a permit to put up a fence. I mean, why would that occur to me? I've lived in other places, I've put up a fence in my backyard, and all I had to do is come up with money to pay the fence guy, right? Now, my guy came in out of Asheville. Is he expected to know that, you know what I'm saying? So something that we could do to proactively promote, maybe even something, it's too late this year, but each year, every property tax bill goes out by mail. Could we insert a little brochure or card into the property tax bill? Is that something that would work? Just two suggestions.
I think
An owner can do his own.
Yes,
Yeah.
an owner can do their own tree work and don't have to be licensed.
Yeah, if they're not 66 years old.
How good are you with the chainsaw?
I think getting to that point of being responsible for what you're gonna do on your property is an uphill battle because I don't know how you effectively get that education to the homeowner or property owner over and over again, because it's constantly changing.
Sure.
And honestly, if they're coming in on the weekend doing it, they probably already know they're not supposed to do it.
Because there's nobody around to see it on the weekend.
Well, I mean, they know enough to know that it's down and that the enforcement is after it's already down, so they attain their goal. But just like the permit that we get for disturbing the lake, the trout buffer, right? If we get a mass permit, right? I try over and over to get people to months in advance to get ready for that, and nobody gets ready for it. Very few get ready for it, right? But when September and October come, all the calls come in and say, "Hey, we need to do this," and I'm like, "Well, I'm sorry. We send out postcards." So the town sends out postcards, we do notifications, and you still get no response. You get this influx of people that come in, and they just wait till the last minute, and it's just too late. And I think that's what we're going to find here is that you can do all the education, but they have to get to it.
And I think the other side, and I've been in towns where we took the opposite approach, where You know, if you wanted to cut a tree, you had to get a permit. So the onus was on the property owner to come get a permit. They could use whoever they wanted to, but it was a deal where the regulations really targeted the property owner, and they were regulated that way. And that is so burdensome that it becomes just too difficult to manage. This way, at least you're working with the guys that they're going to call, and if Clint's working closely with them, I think Clint used to do workshops and work with those guys every once in a while. Seems like it's a more effective approach, and it's not as expensive, and it just seems to.
I think it's a great improvement over the way we were trying to do it before.
Yeah.
And the workshop was, you know, it was great. We had a big turnout for that workshop.
We gotta do another.
How many companies do you have that are approved right now? Is it a handful?
It's a pretty good list.
20?
It's over 20.
And it's widespread.
Yeah.
Those guys
They're
are.
from all
And if you wanted that list, is it in one of the brochures up front?
It's not in the brochure, but it's something that I can send out. I can email. Michelle has a copy of it that she gives out every so often when people call. It's mainly upon request is how we do it.
I guess it could change anytime and come off.
Yeah, I mean we don't really add that many. I probably add 1 or 2 a year.
Yeah.
But it really doesn't change that much.
Would there be a place for it on the website, do you think?
We could probably put it on the website. It wouldn't be that hard to put on there.
I do know that when we were looking for tree service providers to solicit bids for the tree trimming we had done from the Lake Lure Inn, there were some of those that were no longer in business or whatever. There's a few of them, so it does probably need to be looked at every once in a while.
Can I circle back to Commissioner Moore's original query as to a parenthetical reference?
Now that you give us thought to it.
Well, I reviewed this and it just didn't dawn on me, but I mean, he makes a great point. The name of this section is land clearing and grading associated with development. And if you go to B7, there's a direct reference where such property includes steep slopes. Steep slope land shall be included as part of the site plan. I'm a little bit old school when it comes to parenthetical references. I think they're a great idea, and it's something that you can fall back on. And I see no issue here or no problem with just say put a parenthetical reference here to C section 92.205. Section 92.206, the title of that first one being application requirements for all land disturbing activity associated with a single family dwelling. And then 92.206, general regulations for all land disturbing activity. So, and this is a reference to steep slopes. Those are the ordinance sites for steep slopes. It's just a quick drop in. It may at some point in time get somebody that's reviewing this that is doing some clearing, that's just maybe just doing some land clearing, with the thought of down the road building a house, that may bounce them and give them the reference they need for future knowing, for future knowledge. I just throw that out there. I think it's a good idea.
But to your point, Commissioner, if they're not going to read the brochures,
Yeah, they're not
Not
going
gonna
to
read this either.
And, people tend to think, maybe if you live out in the country, don't have a lot of regulations. Cut a tree, you're not gonna call somebody to cut a stinking tree in my yard. A lot of people just honestly don't know. Some will know, but maybe if nobody sees me, I'm okay. So you've got the gamut. You've got.
and I do the bulk of my education via phone calls.
Yeah.
People call, I've got this project going on, this is what we need to do. I said, well, you need to talk to Brad Burton about this, and this is, you're talking to the right person regarding, trees, land disturbance, whatever. And, a lot of them get surprised because the thing is, the word is still out there that, you have to have a permit to cut a tree in Lake Lure. And I say, no, you don't have to have a permit to cut a tree. You just need to use someone who's licensed.
You need to use a permitted vendor.
Exactly. And so, you know, we're usually able to, you know, take care of that pretty quick. And they say, oh, well, you know, can you just give me a list? And I send them a list, and you pick whoever you want, as long as they're on the list.
The idea initially, and I think this was before my time, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea initially was to prevent speculative
That's right.
clearing.
Yes.
To,
exactly
you know,
right.
somebody coming in and buying several lots, okay, let's clear these off so people can see what kind of view they've got and aid in the development. That was the impetus for the whole
Exactly.
thing.
It was.
And we're covered on that because
Yes.
we're in good
Yeah.
shape on that part of the ordinance.
So Clint, Brad's suggestions, are you okay with what Brad suggested? Commissioner Moore, would that be helpful?
I
you
don't
think?
care. I'm just looking at the, kind of the big picture. I want the goal to be people leaving with more information.
Well, we've had some turnover in your chair, Brad. I mean, a year ago, you were a new guy.
Right.
So how would you know that the tree related necessarily to his steep slope, right?
Right.
So it may not be the citizens reading it, but folks in, you know.
I'm learning stuff about this ordinance that I didn't know every day. And this is just, I mean, this is part of the zoning ordinance. Anytime you can stay within your ordinance and reference a different section that's applicable, I think it's a good thing.
Sounds good. Well, if it's okay with the board, we'll make a note of that, and then we'll add that when we prepare that ordinance and bring it back next month.
Okay.
Let's see.
Can I just run, I'm a little confused about who can take down a tree. I think I've heard two things. One of them is that if it's a landowner who wants to take down a tree, if he wants to do it himself, he can do that.
Yes.
But then I also thought I heard that if you're gonna take down a tree, you've gotta have a licensed, tree guy to do it. So,
If you're not going to do it yourself,
The landowner cannot hire an unlicensed.
that's right.
okay, but the landowner can do it himself if he wants to.
Yes.
Okay, that kinda went by me, okay. Thank you.
You bet.
So the next change that we had was under 92119B4, talks about clearable areas defined as utility easements. We add, if required, shall follow the route estimated cause of least possible disruption of vegetation. That's something that you don't have utility easements in every site plan that we have some added language there. We removed section or 7, location and nature of tree protection measures to be installed, forest areas and individual significant trees. That's a pretty hard thing to do, we found. Site plan, unless you have someone go in and survey individual trees or individual clumps of trees. And so we just felt that was just really, you know, an unnecessary thing. If they, you know, will it, they can. Generally, it goes back again to footprint, where on their site plan, they're showing us where their building area is, where their septic area is, and where the driveway is. And then we pretty much know anything beyond that has got to be left alone. We communicate that in the review process. That changes the numbers. Down through there, removing more changes. Then we removed where it says the tree protection officer shall review the tree protection aspects of the site plan on an as-needed basis. Any notations he may add to the plan. Whenever somebody submits a plan to me, they're submitting it as a land disturbance permit. So, you know, when I review that, I'm basically signing off as the environmental management officer that that plan meets all of my requirements. At the same time, I'm looking for tree protection aspects as well. So it's all being covered under the same review process, not a separate review process. So that's, you know, why we found it just overkill and redundancy. It's not necessary. Next, go ahead.
Is the term steep slope, is that a defined term in our ordinance?
I think so.
Now, I just looked it up and it doesn't appear to be.
We use the terminology mountain and hillside development. I understand it.
We've got it defined somewhere, Charlie, somehow. If it's not in the definitions, it may be defined within the.
The only reason I noticed is that there's several references here using.
We do define, I'm sorry.
You do define it?
We do define it.
So wouldn't all these references need to be capitalized so that they clearly refer back to that defined term?
Capitalization of steep slope.
Right. It's like they've capitalized tree protection officer, which presumably is a defined term somewhere in the ordinance. That's maybe a question for your lawyer, but typically that's what you do to make clear that any reference is back to that which is defined.
So we're talking about the reference that I was mentioning, pursuant to Commissioner Moore's statement in 7 above here. So you capitalize steep slope and then reference the, that section 92.205 and 92.06.
And then as you come on down into the proposed 7, and proposed 9, you know, those both have multiple references to steep slopes. Just a comment.
I think what Charlie is saying is that whenever there is a term embedded in the regulation and it's defined, it should be made clear that it is defined. I've seen ordinances, both formats. Our ordinance doesn't use that format.
Does it not?
No,
Okay.
it's understood that, you know, a steep slope, if it's defined, we know about it.
So just by reading the ordinance text, you would not necessarily know that a steep slope is a defined term?
I think the user, the compliance officer would know.
Okay.
Brad's new. I think he's still trying to get familiar
I'm
with it.
looking up every other word.
I thought it was defined
Still doing it.
somewhere.
I'm with you.
So,
Thank you for that clarification.
sure.
Some things we define, there's some things we don't define or need to define. That's another meeting.
Well,
Let's see. Moved on down into C, under 3C, we added or thinning after removal of flammable species.
and we,
Probably need to remove within.
yes.
But the way it stated was, we regulating, anything that was like mountain walls, rhododendrons, things like that, within 30 feet of the building. We didn't want that to be an impediment if someone wanted to manage, especially given the aftermath of the rock fire and some of the concerns we have as far as overgrown rhododendron thickets and things like that. Because all that stuff needed to burn, and because it was so large, it really added to the catastrophic nature of the fire. So it felt like, you know, having that is something that if we were not allowing people to be able to manage those things, then that could, you know, be a real problem in the event of a future fire. So we want to give people the ability to do that, and not necessarily, you know, be too terribly hard on them. Because I think the prior thinking was, you know, they didn't want, you know, these ancient rotos destroyed. Okay, well, the reason they're ancient is because they've not been properly managed, truth be known. You know, and I'm one of those that I look at forest management probably from a different angle than a lot of people do. And I guess because I'm a biologist and I look at things from the point that nothing is ever the same. Things are always changing. And, you know, a really old tree, the reason it got that way was because it was fortunate enough to survive all of the various things that nature threw at it. When you put natural dynamics like flood, fire, and those kinds of things into play, a tree that survives those things very lucky. You know, the fire that we had, there's a lot of ancient trees that are now on the floor of the forest, going back to hide the things that are necessary out there. So, you know, protection of trees, in some ways, while it preserves an aesthetic, may not always necessarily be the most helpful for the forest. And the same thing goes with the shrubs and things like that. I think if you have to be able to properly manage these things, and you know, as long as somebody's not wanting to scalping things, then I think okay, what I see becomes a problem, and why again it really comes down to education. What has happened in the past is people would clear a lot, just go and just mow it down. Then in 5 years, they've got just exponential growth that is worse than what they had before they removed all that vegetation. And so then they have to go in and do even more work to get rid of all those new stems that come out. So there's a bit of education that has to be in place to help people understand what good lot management is, how to manage vegetation. I think if we can accomplish that, then there will be a little less likelihood to have to require certain things. I don't know if I make any sense or rambling, but that's kind of the thinking that was going into as we were developing these standards. But we didn't want to create an impediment to anyone who wanted to manage it in a fire-wise sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, you look at what happened in California, it's still happening actually. Management of vegetation around a home or something like that can be very important.
So on C, the change would be to add or thinning and then strike within 30 feet of a building. That gives that lot owner more freedom to clear flammable species in proximity to that house. So this helps the property owner.
And generally the only things that we're talking about as far as really flammable stuff is your rhododendrons, mountain laurels, certain pine species. A lot of people have growth of Virginia pine, and those can all be pretty flammable when they come through. So we don't have a problem.
Clint, how compliant or consistent is this proposed language with the FireWise guidelines?
It's pretty consistent in that fact that the FireWise was consulted as far as their educational material when we were developing some of this, and it's actually included in the tree management handbook. And that Ann and I talked a little bit about this, because it was included in there. That's kind of as far as in the tree management handbook. That's kind of why it ends up in the ordinance. But at the same time, we don't want to be that restrictive. I think the whole purpose for the tree management handbook is to provide a tool for the tree service providers to give their customers the best information. The whole reason, for having that. So, hoping in doing that our service providers are educating from the best way to
If you wanted to get a copy of the tree management handbook, is that on the website? Is it a brochure? Where do you get that?
I don't know if we got on the website, but we do. You can get hard copies for that.
You've got that, I think, on
But not the handbook, right?
right,
The ordinance is, but
Right.
not the handbook.
right.
Right.
That's right. You've got a file with the tree management handbook in it, Clint.
Forgive me again for, I can't find it right now. Does this distinguish between dead trees and live trees?
Dead trees, there's no restriction whatsoever Or hazardous trees.
Okay.
and
How-
that's-
is that in here
It's
some-
in the ordinance, yes.
Okay, where is it, Calamity?
We may not have it in this part just because it wasn't so, well, yeah, we do. It's under, E, under exceptions, where it talks about cutting disease or hazardous trees, cutting trees not classified as significant. And so forth. We'll get to that as we move through.
There it is.
Okay. Oh, disease or hazard, okay. The reason I had seen that section that said that tree topping was prohibited under all circumstances. And I had a big oak in my backyard that I had tied anybody that's been by my house knows that I've got, webbing strung up, and I had strung it up to a tree that I, not very wisely, ended up strangling the tree after about 18 years. So the tree died, but I had this thing, this webbing tied to it to one end, and so I had the tree guy. What's his name? What's one of the big tree guys around here? Who?
Leland?
No, not Neelan. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Anyway, I had them just top the tree. So if you've been by my house there on the golf course, or on 13 on the golf course, you'll see this big old tree going up about, I don't know, maybe 15 feet, and then that's it. I mean, it's everything's topped out, but the webbing is still tied to that large stump.
Actually, what you got's a post.
It is. That's exactly right.
A hat rack.
I was so mad at myself though for the way I did that, you know, but because I love that tree.
Moving on, we removed section D, which was tree protection measures, and that was calling to have protective boundaries, fencing, and things like that around trees. But in most cases, if you're going to be removing trees, obviously you can't protect. The idea was to protect the perimeter of the area, the area that we're not going to be disturbed. What we've generally found is in the process of site clearing and things like that, that's generally not been a problem. We've not really seen that much tree damage and destruction and things like that, just because of the way that the sites are usually cleared. So I've never seen it as a problem, so it was kind of, why do we go through all this extra trouble to fix something that's not really a problem? So that was why we eliminated that section. Then under 92.120, land clearing grading not associated with an application for development authorization. This is one of those things where if a property owner wants to do forest management on a lot that they're not planning out, this is the area of the regs that give them the ability to do some things. We eliminate the sentence that says tree topping is prohibited under any condition. And the reason we put that is because what we're recognizing that you can't do certain things anyway. And tree topping is not an acceptable practice. We're saying that if you can't do excessive removal or thinning, so topping qualifies as that. So that's, we're saying you can't do it unless it's in accordance with this section. So we just felt like that was it was not necessary to have that sentence. Again, we're just eliminating some redundancy. There was another section that removes it. Should be noted due to severe topographic conditions, sensitive natural areas or soils that do not easily support soil drainage systems. Some land may be suited or be unsuited to some land clearing and land service projects that may be proposed. That's going way out on the limb.
What the heck does that mean?
That I'm not necessarily willing to, or feel necessarily qualified to go out on. Because that would mean that every time somebody brings a permit in here, and we have to go out and inspect that lot to see if there's rare plant species, rare ecological communities, examine soils. So there's a whole lot of things that we're asking staff to do that is not really an efficient use of time and would actually delay a person in getting a permit. And on a flat lot, is that really a necessary thing? On a steep slope lot, sure, it's a little bit more important, and then we have that in the steep slope regulations to cover that, where we actually do look at soil types and require a geotechnical engineer to do analysis. But generally, the way we've looked at it before, if the soil will hurt, you can get a septic tank in it, and the health department will approve that, then our general protocol is okay. Even though the soil report may say it's problematic, if it'll hurt, because that's usually the concern, then we kind of deferred that. But the regulations, the amount of hoops they have to jump through under the steep slope regulations covers a lot of these things, so that it's not necessarily needed under this part of the regulations. In B, we added or designee after the tree protection officer. Changed the letter under section 92.120. Added or designee in paragraph 4. Added or designee under section C. Removed all of section 2, or paragraph 2, excuse me. Where it talks about other land clearing and grading subject to the following, and it gives that whole list of things. Again, a lot of this is taking care of some redundancy and things that get caught in the process of applying for a land disturbance permit. So we see a lot of these things being taken care of there. Under section E, which is the exceptions, we removed things as far as just standard widths and things like that. That is just really excessive language that really gets covered under saying tree removed for the purpose of creating a hiking or biking trail. That's really enough without having to explain all the different little amenities that would go with it and the size of the trail and those kind of things. It's all those it's assumed that all those things are going to be part of that. That's all in that section. Then we moved over into the Mountain Hillside development. And in 92.203, under the exemptions B, we removed of this resolution other resolutions that might apply. Stan and I, we kind of scratched our heads over that one, kind of wondering why was that put in there. So we thought it would be fine just to have it in the applicable regulations. Under 92.205A, the last sentence, that the soils map indicates the presence of problematic soils. The soils report meeting the requirements of 92.204C should accompany the application or septic permit. We added that. And that was it.
This is another one that got by me when I was looking at it in review, specifically the or septic permit. So that reads to me as if the soils map indicates the presence of problematic soils, the soils report meeting the requirements 92.204C. 204C is the geotechnical, the hydrology report. Should accompany the application or septic permit. If you go to look at level 2 requirements from Mountain Hillside Development number 2, level 2 requirements shall apply to any application to develop a single-family home where 1, the soils report confirms the presence of problematic soil types, and or the natural slope of the building and grading envelope exceeds 40%. I have recently had a project on a 30% slope lot that had a soils report that was, it indicated some problematic soils, but there was nothing in the geotechnical analysis that there was actually not a geotechnical analysis done, but there was some indication that there was some problematic soils. The way the red, it was kind of like, okay, well, probably should have had the guy do the geotech report, but who it was, I had a feeling that we were going to get through it okay otherwise, and it turned out to be Tom Wilson. I made him aware of this, and sure enough, as they started their foundation excavation, they ended up excavating a huge area that they had to have engineered with gravel and compacted lift fill that they had to have engineered. So I guess what I'm trying to go with all this is the soils report or septic permit gives me a little pause.
It does what? What'd you say?
If you're going to have just to require a soils permit or septic, in other words, if I walk in with a perfectly good with a Rutherford County Environmental Health Improvement permit for a lot, but they've located the drain field and the tank and the repair and the drain field and repair area down here. That's one thing, but my house site may be up here. And so, you know, if I let them go ahead with just an environmental, with just an improvement permit from the county, where I know there may be problematic soils for the foundation that house is going to be, the way this kind of reads right here, they said, sorry pal, I have my septic permit, I'm in level 1, I'm going to take that and run with it. Whereas I'd like to be able to say, you know, we've got Vard, Cowie, mostly soils, which are, you know, 30 to 50% slope, rock. You know what I'm talking about. And that stuff is always, it's generally going to have a geotech to go with it that gives you, and it's a linear process. The geotech's going to make recommendations as to, you know, mitigating those soils, foundation direction, retention wall direction. So I'm a little bit hesitant. Even if we're not making the 40% steep slope cutoff, which is what we define steep slope at, there are a bunch of sites around here that don't come to 40, that would be in this level 1 with just an improvement permit from the county. We would be deficient. And the reason behind this is that Rutherford County does not require plan review for residential, single-family residential structures. You know, a lot of places do. So you walk in, I want to build a house, owner builder, you pay your money, and out the door you go. Especially if this 30% slope is located above our lake. I have a concern. I think the whole raison d'etre behind this is to keep people's houses out of our lake. And where you're finding these slopes are on steep, the sites that are left that are around here are bordering the lake generally. Some of them on Bald Mountain Lake, got a couple on Mirror Lake over there. So this long digressive rambling basically is to say, I would like to see or not maybe it's not and or, but
Just strike or septic permit.
I'd like to see strike septic permit.
Or septic permit. And that,
Does my reasoning make sense? Well, okay, I mean,
Brad,
you're permitting improvements here for a sanitary system, yet your house site may be up here or down here, and that just gives me concern.
I can think of an instance where the site would be across the road.
I'm sorry, sir?
I said I can think of an instance where the site would be on the other side of a road.
Certainly.
Sure.
Certainly, absolutely. Yeah, we just had that happen down the road of the lake operation.
so let's strike that recommendation.
And I apologize for missing that in my review. I didn't dawn on me. That's all.
So this is, Clint, I mean, are you good with this?
Oh,
or-
yeah, I mean, he's the one that enforces that
Okay,
section, not me, so.
Okay.
I mean, it seems to me that what you guys are really trying to do is to just make this work in the field. And there's no major change being proposed here. How long have we had this ordinance on the books? 10 years?
Not quite 10, I don't believe.
Oh, wait.
Well, almost.
We've modified it since, in the last 8 years, I know.
Yeah.
So over basically a 10-year period, we've had these rules on the books, we've had real-world experience with administering it, and what you're doing here really is just tweaking it so that what needs to happen administratively. So we're not really, if anybody were concerned, the fact that nobody's here, I think speaks volumes, because really this is just a workshop on practical application and administration and enforcement. Is that how you see this?
We're taking a C-130 and turning it into a DCT.
A little more nimble, right? Well, based on these comments, I haven't really heard other than just a handful of questions to clarify. Is this in substance today that you're looking for some action from us to give you some approval to proceed or a recommendation to proceed, or do we need to come back again next month and review this
so.
again?
I think this is in response to some earlier conversations that we had regarding the regulations, and council directed the board to take it. I think that's what we're looking for, is a recommendation from you guys to
Yeah.
council.
And so what we'll do, Charlie, is we'll take everything that's been said here today. Brad had some initial recommendations that seemed to align with what Commissioner Moore felt like we needed to do in the very beginning. You had some suggestions about capitalizing some things in here. We're going to take that up, especially when it goes back to an official position with the town TPO. Charlie pointed out a place or two where TPO is not capitalized. Some places that it is. Because it's an official position, it all needs to be capitalized for sure. So we'll take that, bring it back to you in an ordinance form. So you'll have that, and I plan to bring back the section where we've already decided we're going to increase the size of commercial signs and go with a 4x8 format, or 4x, what is it? 4x8 format. We're going to bring that back to you, back with these changes in an ordinance for you to look at. General Assembly just recently.
You went right by me. What, we were talking about the tree protection ordinance, and then
Right.
you talking about signs.
That's right.
I mean, what?
I
I
think
don't,
what
I
he's,
don't get what you're.
Okay.
I think what he was saying in a way of connectivity is that I don't believe Clint or Brad are looking for any action from us today, but having completed this workshop and discussion, at next month's meeting, staff will have a proposed revision to the ordinance
Right.
that we would vote on to recommend one way or the other.
Right.
And in a different matter, there would also be some proposed language regarding some sign changes that I guess we discussed
We did.
last time.
Last week, or last month.
Last month at a workshop, we agreed on the specifications.
Okay.
So we're going to bring you two ordinances back.
Okay, I got you.
So we, I
That's,
guess, would vote as a board to recommend or not.
That's right.
And then it would go to council for action, I guess, at their next meeting.
that's right. The other thing I wanted to tell you about, in keeping with that ordinance we're going to bring back to you, the General Assembly has added new language now that it is a requirement that you basically map any type of change you're going to make to the regulation back to your comprehensive plan. So they have added specific additional language to that. We'll have that language for you. We'll take a look at it next month, but it'll be part of the ordinance.
Well, I think this has been a very helpful workshop, and I think y'all have removed some ambiguity and added some areas to make things a little bit more specific. Have you guys got any other comments?
I just will comment that Clint and the rest of the staff has done a lot of work to get this thing put together. I don't have any issues with it, but that doesn't say that I understand it all either, but I think I do most of it. And I just, you know, I'm ready next week or next month to, you know, follow up and look at the revised stuff and vote either to, you know, go to the council with it or not. So, but I think y'all have done a good job.
Agreed. Jonathan, I guess professionally, you probably have a closer interaction with this part of the ordinance than anybody else on the board. Is there any concern that you've got or that you see from your customers and clients that hasn't been addressed here?
No, but typically, we try to have these discussions, you know, before we begin construction and try to work out as many details as we can, because each project is going to be unique, and pose its own set of circumstances. So, I mean, I have no problems with the recommendations that Clint and Brad have made.
Good. Well, and I'm thinking about this right now, if he showed up on time, Jerry Nealon's in my house right now, removing a white oak that just up and died. I mean, a perfectly healthy tree, you would think, just almost overnight, all the leaves went brown on it. And we're looking at it, is the tree dead, whatever, so we get him out there and look at it. And, you know, I didn't think about getting a permit, but I hired somebody who I know is approved to do business with the town, so it's his job to know what he can and can't do. And I think that process works, and as long as we can continue to educate people that if you're gonna hire work out, you know, it's gotta be from somebody that's on this list, and I'm open to suggestions about the way to do it. But if people are calling up wanting to know, how do I get a permit? That would suggest that there's a pretty good general awareness that they at least have to ask before they start.
Well, oftentimes, and many people, I believe that many people that are on this list, if there's a tree in question and they don't really need permission to take it down, they will call up and say, hey, I need to take this tree down because of this. And just out of respect that that's the right thing to do. And I think that quite a few people on that list already do that, Jerry Nealon included.
Yeah.
I just want to, Charlie, if I may, I just want to say something. I'm going to embarrass Clint here just for a second. A lot of these recommendations are coming from Clint. His practical exercise of this ordinance is our tree protection officer. And Clint grew up in the country, and Clint is as property rights as they come. He's also a biologist, and that unique mix in one person and having that person in that position gives us a very unique perspective when we are working through these regulations. And you are seeing that perspective come out, and I certainly pay a lot of deference to Clint because of his background and where he's coming from, but largely what you're seeing in these recommendations is coming from Clint and his unique perspective, which I think gives us real value here at the town. He didn't grow up in an apartment building in New York City and one day decided he wanted to save all the trees on the planet, and he found a job with a small southern town in North Carolina. He grew up here, so I appreciate the work that he does.
To me, I'd burn this about every 10 years.
Clint, now hush. We got the cameras
Strike that
on.
from the record, please.
I think we're live streaming this first time.
See, anyway, thanks, Charles.
No, well, thanks to both of you for your obvious hard work on this. So I think it's been a productive workshop, and I guess on our agenda, the only remaining item is our planning projects update.
If there are no questions, I'm certainly glad to move on. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer. We're busy. The biggest project we've got right now that's in the works is the Morse Park plan. That is on its way to being finalized, the final version of that plan. The Parks and Rec Board will review the final iteration or rendering on November the 2nd. We'll put that online November 3rd. We'll solicit public comment, and then that will go on to council in November. If council would like to, for a public hearing, if council would like to push that to December, they certainly can. But that's where we are with that plan, so it's getting some real traction. The biggest thing is that once we finish with this plan, we're going to be releasing RFQs to architects to redesign what really is the Welcome Center, to convert that, start the process to convert those to restrooms. That is something that the Parks and Rec Board has added to the final plan. It really was that suggestion, that recommendation was in both of the plans they reviewed. So we're going to be ramping up staff to prepare to solicit qualifications of architects for us to start that design. That has been discussed.
Welcome Center go?
They're going to maintain a presence there in it.
So it'd just be a downsized presence?
That's right, downsized presence, and then their goal is to work with the town in creating a large presence there at the edge of the marina and build that with TDA money. So that's where we're headed with this plan and that particular
Is that
facility.
two-story building they had that was right there?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. So we had to get through this process for us to kind of distill where the restrooms would be, how existing facilities would be used, or whether we just add new restrooms out there. So through this discussion, that is going to be in that plan, and that's the recommendation going to council. So we'll wait and see what council does with it before we go after the architect, if that seems to be how it's shaping up. We already have money in the budget for remodeling or construction, and so our goal is to hit those funds as they've been budgeted for the restrooms. That's the biggest project we've got going on. There are other things in the works. We're trying to wrap up Lake Lure Classical Academy, easements for water and sewer. The town has agreed to take over the main water line on the campus. Any laterals, any additional appurtenances to that water line will be the responsibility of the school. So we've got a meeting at 11 o'clock, conference call with attorneys today to try to pull that together. And sewer, Classical Academy agrees that the sewer is their responsibility. But relative to water and sewer, they've also agreed that in the future, if the town needs to extend those systems to adjoining town parcels, they would agree for the town to do that, and we would find the best route for extension of water and sewer working together in the event that comes about at some point in the future.
Is that part of a new agreement or an old agreement? I thought they had already agreed to that.
They agreed to it. We're just now making it legal.
I see.
So we're working with the attorney to carry that out.
And this came up recently during the discussion about the refinance of the bonds, because an easement is appurtenant to and runs with land and should not be subject to any sort of loan or mortgage put in place. So I pointed out that before we go and put this new debt in place on the school, those easements really need to be put there first. So I think what this loan application has done is to kind of speed up the process of papering.
That's right.
You just described.
Interesting session at a planning conference in Greenville a couple weeks ago. Walked into a planning conference, and engineers basically then announced that the big three automakers had been meeting, talking about moving the auto industry from carbon-based fuels to electric. GM has announced that they're going to move production from internal combustion engines to electric. China has said there'll be no more combustion engines sold in China. I think it's 2025. I don't think we're there as quick as some are forecasting, but there seems to be real movement, moving things to electric vehicles.
Well, I'm glad my SUV just went up.
May have. I say that to say this. We're planning to put in an electric vehicle charging station next to the Welcome Center, so we have a meeting this week to kind of finalize the materials list for that, and it's happening in other places too. So I don't know if it's going to happen as fast as some are projecting, but it seems to be something that's moving. So we'll see. So we're going to have our own electric vehicle charging station here in Lake Lure.
I keep wondering what happens when 5 people show up, only 5 people, and they have to wait in line for that one charging station.
Well, the libertarian approach is the biggest person wins, so I don't know what will happen. So that's in the works. Let's see if there's anything else on here that we need to talk about. All the other ordinances that we've talked about, we need amendments we need to make. We are working on those. We're certainly mining other jurisdictions about the permitted uses they have in their commercial districts, and we're making an exhaustive list of about 7 or 8 jurisdictions to see what we can do to our commercial districts to ensure that we're not holding commercial growth back. It's certainly needed. So we're moving in that direction. The island in front of the arcade building, the grassy area, it has old electric lines and poles there. We've been working to put the power underground. The power is now underground, so those old poles are coming out of there, and that will help dress up that area there. So that's something we've been working on. A big thank you to Lake Lure Electric. They have been working hard on that and have been donating the labor to the town for that. If there are no other questions, those are the highlights.
I would just comment that on that electric car switchover, that if that were put to a vote, I would guess that 95% of the people would not support that. That they want to, you know, I'm one of them. I love my gas guzzler. And, you know, to heck with electric cars.
We put the vote form by which ones you buy.
That's right. Well, yeah, exactly. So anyway.
Yes.
The, well, never mind.
Most unusual for Mr. Barrett to have the last word unless he is offering a motion. Which we would entertain.
No, I think we should stay with the history of New York.
I can't.
We're looking for, I move that we adjourn.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good.
Thank
See
you.
you next month.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Clint and Brad.
Yes, sir. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I just realized the practical complication of, okay, we just